The sun was beginning to hide behind the distant mountains when we finally arrived at the site. It was a remote stretch of Utah, known for its ancient and almost unexplored rock formations. The massive stones, sculpted by time, stood like silent, imposing sentinels as the cold wind blew, bringing with it a strange feeling of desolation. The place was perfect for what we were looking for: total isolation, far from civilization and the incessant noise of cities. Still, there was something in the air that seemed out of place. While we set up camp, I noticed that my friends were quieter than usual. Perhaps it was the fatigue from the journey, or maybe, like me, they were sensing that indefinable feeling emanating from the rocks. I tried to shake off the discomfort, convincing myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks. There was something exciting about being in such a primitive and untouched place, as if we were rediscovering a lost piece of the world. However, the idea that this place might hide ancient and unknown secrets wouldn't leave my mind. I looked at the sky, tinged red and orange by the setting sun, and wondered what it had witnessed over the centuries. With the camp finally set up, we decided to explore the surroundings before darkness fully fell. We walked among the rock formations, the shadows of the stones casting eerie shapes over us. Conversations became scarce, each of us absorbed in the vastness of that landscape, so alien to our understanding. That's when we found it, the stone circle. It wasn't natural, I was sure of it. The stones, arranged in an almost perfect ring, seemed to defy the logic of chance. In the center, there were marks on the ground, as if something had been dragged there recently. We all approached in silence, fascinated and at the same time disturbed by what we saw. The marks on the ground, though weathered, seemed recent, as if someone or something had been there not long ago. One of my friends, Tom, was the first to break the silence. "This isn't nature's work," he murmured, looking around as if expecting to see the creator of that unusual structure. No one disagreed. The unease inside me grew, a feeling that we were about to discover something that should have remained hidden. We decided to return to camp before the night completely engulfed us, but the stone circle lingered in our thoughts, leaving the sense that this was just the beginning. Back at camp, dusk had already turned into deep night. The fire we had lit cast dancing shadows on the rocks around us, but it wasn't enough to dispel the cold that was settling into our bones. Sitting around the campfire, we tried to resume the light conversation from earlier, but there was a tension in the air that none of us could ignore. Everyone's eyes would occasionally dart to the darkness surrounding us, as if expecting to see something emerge from it. Then we heard the first sound, a twig snapping, distant but distinctly audible. Everyone froze. No one spoke, but the fear was palpable. The next few seconds dragged on, and another sound emerged, closer this time. Slow footsteps crunching dried leaves. Everyone's breathing grew heavier, the silence between us becoming almost deafening. Whatever was out there, it was moving, methodically circling us. I looked at my friends' faces, searching for a reaction, anything to break that paralyzing terror. But they all seemed as scared as I was. A feeling of being watched, of something unseen lurking in the darkness, began to take hold of me. Still, I tried to stay calm, convincing myself that it was just nocturnal animals passing by. But deep down, something told me we were far from any rational explanation. The sounds didn't stop. In fact, they became more frequent and closer. No one dared speak anymore. The fire crackled, sending small sparks into the sky, but even that seemed a distant sound, muffled by the weight of the fear enveloping us. Tom suggested that we should investigate the circle again, to see if there was anything we had missed. Reluctantly, we all agreed, though I could sense that none of us really wanted to go back there. But something, an invisible and irresistible force, seemed to be pushing us toward that place. We walked in silence, our flashlights trembling in our hands, lighting the way back to the stone circle. When we arrived, we noticed that something was different. The marks on the ground, they seemed to have shifted. What had once been a disordered sequence of scratches now appeared to form a pattern, a symbol I couldn't comprehend, but somehow awakened a primal fear in me. The silence around us was absolute, so dense that the sound of our own breathing seemed out of place. At that moment, I was certain we were not alone. An invisible and malevolent presence seemed to be surrounding us, watching our every move, waiting. But for what? The terror had taken root in our bones. Without exchanging more words, we all knew the only option was to get out of there as quickly as possible. The stone circle, with its disturbing marks, had made it clear that we were dealing with something we couldn't understand, much less confront. We began to dismantle the camp in a hurry, our hands trembling as we gathered our things. But the faster we tried to work, the more difficult the process seemed. Every sound in the forest around us, a snapped branch, a leaf moved by the wind, seemed amplified, as if nature itself was warning us to flee. When we were finally ready to leave, the panic reached its peak. One of our friends, Jake, who had always been the calmest and most rational, suddenly fainted. His body fell heavily to the ground, and for a moment we were paralyzed by shock. What should have been a simple adventure trip was turning into a nightmare. Without thinking too much, Tom and I lifted him, supporting him between us, while the others tried to stay calm enough to guide the way back. Every step was an effort, every shadow a threat. Whatever it was following us, and the idea that we might not escape this time became increasingly real. The forest around us seemed alive, conspiring to keep us from leaving. The trees, which had once been just part of the landscape, now seemed to enclose us, their branches extending like claws in the dark. We managed to spot the road in the distance, a strip of safety amid the chaos. However, we knew we weren't safe yet. Jake was still unconscious, and every move to carry him slowed us down. I could feel the terror in the air, a pressure that made my heart pound uncontrollably, as if time itself was against us. The sound of footsteps continued, now clearer and closer, and it seemed that no matter how fast we ran, whatever was following us was always just a few meters away. When we finally reached the car, we threw Jake into the back seat, and without losing another second, Tom turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and the car sped down the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust behind us. No one looked back, as if we all knew that seeing whatever had been chasing us could be our final ruin. The darkness of the night enveloped us, but inside the car, the feeling of relief began to mix with doubt. Were we safe now, or had something come with us? The car sliced through the darkness of the dirt road. The sound of the tires against the gravel was almost comforting after the horrors we had left behind. Jake was still unconscious in the back seat, but at least he was breathing regularly. No one said a word. The silence in the vehicle was heavy, each of us lost in our own thoughts and fears. I could feel my body beginning to relax, which seemed impossible minutes before, but there was something that still wouldn't leave me in peace. The fear hadn't completely disappeared, and an unsettling feeling persisted, like an itch in the back of my mind that I couldn't ignore. As we approached the town, relief began to give way to something else: doubt. No matter how much I tried to convince myself that we had escaped, something deep inside me insisted that the danger hadn't stayed behind. Tom slowed down as we entered the outskirts of the town, the lights of the houses becoming visible, bringing a sense of safety that I couldn't fully share. That's when I realized that feeling of being watched, which had been so oppressive in the forest, was still there, faint but present. I looked at the others, trying to find some confirmation in their faces, but they all seemed too exhausted to notice. I took a deep breath and decided not to mention anything, at least not yet. When we arrived at Jake's house, we laid him on his couch, and each of us went to our respective homes, swearing that we would never speak of what happened again. But as I walked away, a shadow seemed to follow me, a persistent reminder of what we left behind. Perhaps, just perhaps, we weren't truly alone. The winding mountain road seemed endless, but after hours of driving, I finally spotted the small wooden cabin nestled among the trees. The place was exactly like the pictures we'd seen online. A simple, yet cozy structure with a porch that offered a stunning view of the distant mountains. As soon as I stepped out of the car, the crisp mountain air enveloped me, and I took a deep breath, letting the tranquility of the place seep into my senses. "This is exactly what we needed," Sarah said beside me as I unlocked the cabin door with the key the owner had left for us. The interior was even more charming than we'd expected. A large, worn leather sofa occupied the center of the room, facing a stone fireplace. Old paintings adorned the walls, and the scent of wood and pine filled the air. It was the perfect setting for a weekend of total disconnection. After we unpacked and explored every corner of the cabin, we decided to open a bottle of wine we had brought, toasting to the much-anticipated break. Night fell quickly, and with it, the sounds of nature around us intensified. The wind gently rustled through the trees, and the rustling of leaves created a soft melody. I found an old record player in one of the corners and put on a jazz record. For a moment, everything felt perfectly in harmony. We settled on the porch, watching as the stars began to sparkle in the dark sky. "Do you think anyone's ever written a story about a place as perfect as this?" I asked, smiling at Sarah. She laughed, wrapping her arms around me. "If they haven't, they should. It's an inspiring place." And so, between laughs and promises of an unforgettable weekend, I didn't notice the shadows lengthening around the cabin, nor the eyes watching us from afar. I woke up the next morning to the sound of birds and the soft light filtering through the cabin's curtains. Sarah was still asleep beside me, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful, as it should. I prepared a simple breakfast in the cabin's small kitchen, and soon after, Sarah joined me at the table, a sleepy smile on her face. After breakfast, we decided to explore the nearby trail that led to a lookout point. The day passed pleasantly, with light conversation and laughter, as we admired the lush nature around us. The sound of a distant stream, the scent of wildflowers, and the gentle sway of the trees in the wind created a serene environment that made time seem to stand still. As the sun began to set, we returned to the cabin, exhausted but satisfied. While I lit the fireplace, Sarah prepared a simple dinner. The night promised to be as peaceful as the day had been, but there was something in the air, a subtle feeling that something was off, though I didn't want to admit it to myself. After dinner, we returned to the porch, and I poured 2 glasses of wine. The night was clear, and the stars shone brightly in the sky. However, as I talked to Sarah about my plans for my next book, I noticed the cabin lights flicker briefly. "Did you see that?" I asked, frowning. Sarah looked towards the cabin and shrugged. "It's probably an electrical fault. This place is old, after all." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The lights flickered again when I mentioned the word fear, as if the cabin was reacting to the conversation. The night continued with a few more flickers of the lights, each time we touched on more personal or sensitive topics. At first, I tried to ignore it, but soon the discomfort took hold of me as well. What should have been a peaceful night was turning unsettling, as if the cabin had ears and eyes. "Maybe we should go inside," Sarah suggested, trying to hide the nervousness in her voice. I agreed, though I couldn't help but notice that the lights remained stable when we finally got up to go inside, as if whatever was causing it knew we were trying to escape. We entered the cabin, closing the door behind us, not knowing that the real terror was just beginning. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling, as if the air inside the cabin had gotten heavier. Sarah was already awake, sitting at the small kitchen table, absent-mindedly stirring her cup of coffee. I could see that she was just as uneasy, though she didn't want to say anything to worsen the tension between us. After breakfast, We decided to go out and explore the area around the cabin again, trying to leave behind the discomfort of the previous night. As we walked along the trail that led to the stream, my eyes scanned the surroundings more attentively, as if searching for something I didn't yet know what it was. Then, Sarah suddenly stopped. "Ben, look at this," she said, pointing to something among the leaves. I knelt beside her and saw what had caught her attention. A small camera, disguised among the branches of a bush, pointed directly at the cabin. My heart instantly began to race. Who would have put that camera there? And more importantly, why would someone be watching us? I looked around, feeling the unease grow inside me. This isn't normal," I muttered, more to myself than to Sarah. "We're being watched." Sarah looked as disturbed as I was. The idea that someone was monitoring our every move, every word we said, was terrifying. Suddenly, the place that was supposed to be our refuge turned into something threatening. Every tree, every shadow seemed to be hiding something or someone. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, with an urgency in her voice that I couldn't ignore. But something inside me stopped me from agreeing immediately. "We need to find out who's doing this first," I replied, determined to understand what was happening. With a determination that bordered on desperation, I began to search the area around the cabin for more cameras or hidden devices. The tension between us was palpable. Each time I found another wire, another camera, the feeling of being hunted grew. Sarah stayed close to the cabin, watching as I explored the surroundings. Her heart seemed to be racing just as fast as mine, each beat a reminder of the invisible danger that surrounded us. Finally, after some time, I returned with a thin wire I had found hidden among the trees. "This leads somewhere," I said, trying to stay calm. "We need to follow it." With heavy hearts and labored breaths, we prepared to follow the wire, not knowing that what we would find at the end of the trail would be far more disturbing than anything we had ever imagined. Following that wire felt like stepping into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Each step we took along the uneven trail seemed to pull us deeper into a world where reality and fear blurred together. The wire snaked along the forest floor, disappearing and reappearing among the fallen leaves, as if it was guiding us to a place we would rather never have found. After walking for about 20 minutes, we spotted something that made my stomach turn. In the middle of the forest, almost completely hidden by the dense vegetation, was a smaller cabin, very different from the one we were staying in. It was a rough, rustic structure with dark wooden planks and windows covered by thick curtains, which seemed to have been placed to block any glimpse of the interior. The wire we were following passed through a gap in the cabin door and disappeared inside. I looked at Sarah, who seemed just as scared as I was, but there was a determination in her eyes that matched my own. "We need to see what's inside," I said, trying to control the tremor in my voice. She nodded, and together, we approached the door. With a trembling hand, I pushed the door open, which creaked loudly in the oppressive silence of the forest. The interior of the cabin was dark and smelled of mold, as if no one had been there for a long time. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized we were far from alone. In the center of the room was a rough table with several monitors, all displaying live images from the cabin where we were staying. My heart pounded. The monitors showed different angles: the bedroom, the living room, the porch. Every move we'd made had been recorded, every word we'd said captured by those hidden cameras. I approached the monitors with trembling hands, feeling the horror grow inside me. Then I saw something else that made me freeze. Next to the table was a shelf full of videotapes and hard drives, all labeled with dates and names. "These are recordings," Sarah murmured, her voice barely audible. "Of other people." I scanned the labels, and a chill ran down my spine as I realized those recordings went back many years. They were couples, families, all who, like us, had stayed in the main cabin. The recordings showed increasingly intimate, disturbing scenes, captured without the victims ever knowing they were being filmed. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, the terror clear in her voice. I agreed immediately, but before we could move, we heard a sound that made time stop. Footsteps. Slowly, we turned to the door, and there, in the shadows, we saw the silhouette of someone standing, watching us. The observer was closer than we had ever imagined. The silence inside that dark cabin was suffocating, broken only by the slow steps approaching us. Fear paralyzed me, and for a moment, it felt like my body had frozen. Sarah gripped my hand tightly, and that was all it took to spur me into action. I had to get us out of there. In one swift motion, I pulled Sarah back towards a small window at the rear of the cabin. "This way," I whispered urgently. Without looking back, I forced the window open, and we squeezed through it, landing on the cold ground outside. The shock of the chilly air against my skin jolted me back to reality, but the terror still pulsed through me. We ran through the forest, not caring about the noise we made or the branches that scratched at our clothes and skin. Every step echoed in my ears, the sound of our feet crushing the dry leaves blending with the pounding of my heart. There was no time to think, only to run. When we finally reached the main cabin, we rushed inside and slammed the door shut. My hands shook as I tried to use the landline phone on the wall, but, as I feared, the line was dead. "We can't call for help," I murmured, the despair starting to settle in. Sarah, however, was already grabbing the car keys. "It doesn't matter. We need to leave now," she said, with a determination that left no room for argument. I nodded, gathering our things as quickly as possible. The feeling of being watched was almost tangible, as if the observer's gaze was in every corner of that cabin. We raced to the car, and I started the engine with trembling hands. We sped down the winding trail, leaving the cabin and the forest that now seemed to hide more than just trees behind us. Sarah kept glancing nervously over her shoulder, expecting to see the figure of the observer following us, but the road was empty. Still, the sense of safety was far from returning. The dirt road stretched out before us like an endless tunnel. The silence inside the car was oppressive. The adrenaline kept me alert, but there was something I couldn't shake off. Then, Sarah, sitting next to me, suddenly tensed up. I noticed her eyes were fixed on the rearview mirror, and I followed her gaze. In the corner of the trunk, between some blankets we had thrown in there, a small LED light was blinking softly. It was a camera, hidden among our belongings. The panic I had felt earlier came back full force, tightening my chest like a vice. The observer hadn't been left behind. He was with us, even now. "What is it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Sarah just pointed, unable to speak. I looked at the rearview mirror again, feeling a wave of terror wash over me. The soft glow of the LED was a reminder that what we had experienced wasn't over. The terror we thought we had left in the forest was now following us, clinging to us like a shadow. I kept driving down the deserted road, but the certainty that we were still being watched never left me. The story ended there, but the fear we had experienced was far from over. The dense forest felt like a labyrinth of ancient trees, with intertwined branches forming an almost impenetrable natural barrier. I was leading the group, with Gabriel and Julia right behind me. Our footsteps were muffled by the carpet of dry leaves beneath our feet. Summer vacations had always been the perfect time for our adventures, but nothing until that day had been as mysterious as what we found. I was the one who noticed something strange on the ground. A metal door, almost completely covered by roots and moss, as if the forest itself was trying to hide it. Curiosity took over, and I quickly cleared away the vegetation, revealing a rusty iron handle. The sound of the door creaking as I opened it sent a chill down my spine. A musty smell escaped from the darkness that opened before us. There was a stone staircase leading down, swallowed by the darkness. "This must be ancient," Gabriel murmured, hesitant. "Maybe we shouldn't go in." But I was already consumed by curiosity. I took out my flashlight and started descending, ignoring Gabriel's warnings. Julia gave me a worried look before following me, with Gabriel, reluctant, bringing up the rear. The staircase seemed endless, each step taking us deeper into the earth. When we finally reached the bottom, there was a narrow corridor ahead of us, with aged concrete walls. We were officially in a world long forgotten. The corridor was so narrow that it forced us to walk in single file. The light from our flashlights barely penetrated the dense darkness, revealing only fragments of dust-covered walls. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of our cautious footsteps. The feeling of isolation was palpable, as if the outside world had completely disappeared. I reached the end of the corridor and came upon a worn wooden door. I pushed it open carefully, and it creaked eerily as it gave way. We entered a room that seemed to have been abandoned in a hurry. There was a table with chairs askew around it, dirty cups still on the surface, and clothes tossed in a corner. Everything was covered by a thick layer of dust, as if no one had set foot there in decades. "It's like time stopped here," Julia whispered, her voice low, afraid to disturb the oppressive silence. Gabriel, still cautious, looked around with wide eyes. Something's not right. Why would they leave everything like this? But my mind was focused on the details. I inspected the room, shining my flashlight across the walls, noticing faded framed photos and yellowed papers scattered on the table. Each discovery only fueled my curiosity. The sense of mystery grew with every step, as if the house itself was trying to tell us a forgotten story. We continued exploring, finding more rooms, each with its own scene frozen in time. But the further we went, the heavier the atmosphere became, as if something invisible was watching us from the shadows. As we moved forward, the silence in that place became increasingly unsettling. The air felt thicker, almost suffocating, as if it were filled with memories of a past everyone preferred to forget. But I was determined to explore every corner of that place. Then, at the end of a longer and darker corridor than the previous ones, we came across a door locked from the outside. "Why would someone lock this door like that?" Julia asked, her voice tinged with apprehension. Driven by a mix of curiosity and stubbornness, I began to force the lock. With more effort than I expected, the lock gave way, and the door slowly opened. The smell that emanated from inside was different from the rest of the bunker, something more putrid, more desperate. When the light from our flashlights finally illuminated the interior, what we saw made us all instinctively recoil. The room's walls were covered with deep scratches, marks made by human nails. There were dark stains that could have been blood, long since dried. It was evident that someone, at some point, had desperately tried to escape from there. The terror of imagining what had happened in that room began to penetrate even my thoughts, which until then had been driven by the excitement of discovery. "We need to get out of here," Gabriel insisted, his tone now firm, almost pleading. "Something terrible happened here, and I don't think we should stay to find out what." Julia seemed torn between her growing fear and her desire to stay by my side. But I, though shaken, felt there was more to be discovered, something that might justify the horrific events that had clearly taken place there. Unable to shake my curiosity, I took a few more steps into the room, observing the marks on the walls as if trying to decipher a silent story. But deep down, I knew there was a fine line between courage and recklessness, and I was about to cross it. Leaving the room marked by despair, we continued in silence, the weight of what we had seen seeping into our thoughts. The atmosphere around us seemed increasingly oppressive, as if the bunker itself was alive, whispering secrets no one should know. But there was something in that place I couldn't ignore, something that drew me in an inexplicable way. We entered a room that appeared to have been an office. There was a large table in the center, cluttered with papers yellowed by time. I began sifting through the documents, my hands trembling slightly as I turned each page. Then I found a newspaper, dated several decades ago. The headline, partially faded, spoke of a local family that had mysteriously disappeared. These people, I murmured as I read deeper into the article, were living in fear of something. But of what? Gabriel and Julia moved closer, reading about the last days of that family. Diaries left behind described strange sounds, shadows that moved at night, and a constant feeling of being watched. The account culminated in a description of a desperate escape, but the family's fate was never clarified. As I read, I began to feel the same sense of dread that likely dominated those who had lived there. Now I understood that the place was infused with something beyond time, something that perhaps had never really left those walls. The revelation that the house had been abandoned out of fear of something unknown made the air around us feel heavier, almost suffocating. Julia, sensing the growing tension in me, placed a hand on my shoulder. "Lucas, this isn't safe. We need to leave now before it's too late." But I hesitated. Part of me knew we should leave, but another part, the more stubborn one, still believed there was more to be discovered, something that would explain everything. However, even I felt that time was running out, that the walls of that bunker were closing in around us, shortening the time for any decision. The silence, which had previously been merely uncomfortable, was now unbearable. Every step we took seemed to echo endlessly through the corridors, as if the bunker itself were amplifying the sounds to remind us we were intruders there. The weight of what I had discovered hit me hard, and for the first time, I began to wonder if we had gone too far. The feeling of being watched, which had previously seemed like mere growing paranoia, was now almost tangible. Gabriel was the first to vocalize what we were all thinking. "Enough, Lucas. We need to get out of here. Now." I finally nodded, my determination giving way to fear. We began to trace our way back, but something seemed different. The corridors that had once been familiar now seemed distorted, as if the bunker was trying to confuse our senses. What had once seemed like a simple exploration was now turning into a desperate struggle to escape from something invisible yet palpable. When we reached the staircase leading to the exit, a wave of relief washed over me, only to be replaced by terror when we discovered that the metal door, which we had left slightly ajar, was now completely locked. Gabriel ran to it, pulling on the handle with force, but the door wouldn't budge. Desperation quickly spread among us. "How is this possible?" Julia questioned, her voice trembling. "We left it open." Fighting back panic, I remembered the notes I had read in the diaries. There was a mention of a security mechanism, something that could lock the exit in case of an emergency. I knew our only chance was to find this mechanism and deactivate it. But time was running out. The sense of imminent danger was growing, like a shadow about to engulf us. With Julia and Gabriel anxiously waiting, I ran back through the corridors, following the vague instructions from the diaries. Every second felt like an eternity, but I finally found what I was looking for. A small metal box embedded in the wall, with a series of switches and levers. I hesitated for a moment, but knew there was no time for doubts. With a decisive movement, I deactivated the system, hearing a loud click that echoed through the bunker. I ran back to my friends, and together, we tried the door again. This time, it gave way, opening to freedom. Without looking back, we climbed the stairs and emerged into the forest, the cool night air enveloping us like a saving embrace. When we finally stopped to catch our breath, we all knew we would never return to that place. The mystery of what really happened in that bunker would remain forever buried with the secrets it held. Hey everyone! If you enjoyed the stories, leave a comment. Your feedback is really important to us. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel. Thank you for watching.